Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today on the digital workplace, how to build company culture through remote peer-to-peer learning by 360Learning, Powtoon, and Drew's Multimedia. So we're just going to give people a couple minutes to join us, but while we wait, if you'd like to go into the chat tab on the right and just let us know where in the world you're joining us from, and if you're working remotely, in person, or hybrid. So looking forward to hearing your answers. Barcelona, 100% remote. That's great. I'd like to be there. New York. Okay. Hybrid remote. A lot of remote still. Yep. 100% remote, 100% remote. Okay, wow, yeah. And hybrid. Okay. Well, that's great to hear. Well, me anyway, I think it's great to hear that people are still able to work remotely if they like. Sicily, London. Wow. Okay, so lots of people from all over the world. That's great to see. All right, I think we can get started now. So again, thank you so much everyone for joining us for our webinar today, how to build company culture through remote peer-to-peer learning. I'm Robin, and I'm part of the content team here at 360Learning. We have some great speakers for you today. Just before I introduce them, a couple of housekeeping things. You'll all receive the recording of this webinar after the event. There will be a live Q&A session at the end. If you do have questions that come to you throughout the presentation, please put those in the questions tab, not the chat tab, just helps us keep track of them. We're also going to launch a few polls throughout the presentation, so you can respond to those in the polls tab, again off to the right. And lastly, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see, I think it's a little smiley face emoji. And if you click on that, you're able to send up little reactions, exactly just like that. So if you like what you hear or want to react to the presentation, please feel free to make use of those. Okay, so I'm happy to introduce our three amazing speakers for you today. We have Jonah Goldstein, Head of Learning at 360Learning. We have Nick Liebman, Head of Content at Powtoon, and Joe Drews, founder of Drew's Multimedia. And today, you're going to be learning about how to leverage technology to share knowledge and stay connected in a remote workplace, which I think is very relevant for everyone here who's working remotely. How to use videos effectively to create better learning experiences. And we'll talk about collaborative learning, why a distributed peer-to-peer learning approach strengthens company culture. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Nick to start us off.
Great. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, everybody out there joining us, and to the other speakers today. It's a very, very important, very, very timely conversation we're going to have. And I'm really happy to be here representing Powtoon. If you guys don't know, Powtoon is a video creation platform that people often use for all sorts of internal communications, learning and development use cases, as well as for tons of others, but we're here to talk about this today. And I wanted to start with the poll question. So if we could have the next slide, please. And if you would all be so kind, the poll should show up there in the poll tab in just a moment. What are your biggest motivators for implementing peer-to-peer learning? After all, that's why we all signed up to be here today. The responses here, this is just a handful. Obviously, you may have other reasons, but many of the reasons that people are looking to implement peer-to-peer learning fall into these three categories. A, we're remote, we're hybrid now, and we need to keep learners engaged like we haven't before. B, the Great Resignation, right? Everybody is aware that there is a huge shift going on in people's willingness to leave jobs to seek other opportunities. This has a huge impact on how we're communicating with each other, especially how we're training each other and the way we're engaging with each other, right? And C, we want to be at the cutting edge of learning and development. And I think peer-to-peer learning definitely is at the cutting edge. Today, my section here, we're going to get into a lot of this stuff. Let's keep on moving to the next slide, please, Robin. But first, I wanted to talk about why all three of these are really important to you, to your company, for implementing. First of all, if you're implementing peer-to-peer learning with remote learners, you're tapping existing expertise, especially when we're having to shift to hybrid, or possibly, maybe in our area things are changing. There's a certain kind of productivity that can increase when we're working remotely, and other kinds of productivity that tend to suffer, right, when we're not in the same place. And tapping the existing expertise in your company is a way to for everyone to benefit from that expertise, and to have a network effect so that can spread out, whether you're in the same place or in distributed locations. Building trust between teams and individuals. This is so important and so easy to do when we're training each other, when we're sharing our expertise with each other, helping each other get good results at our work, and to collaborate better together. It builds trust between individuals. It builds trust between teams, which can often also become really difficult. I don't know about everyone here, when Powtoon implemented a lot of remote policies for folks. Definitely, we talked to the people we worked with, and all of those little moments to connect with people on other teams especially started to dry up, right? And so this is another way to kind of build that trust and connection across your company. Finally, it deepens commitment to the company. A company that respects your expertise and asks you, or the best way to do things, is a company that respects you, and that deepens a commitment from people who are working for the company. Next slide, please, ladies and gentlemen. The Great Resignation, this is relevant here, right? And I'm actually going to start at the bottom of my list there, but a strong culture that attracts top talent and retains your most valuable employees. The best thing in this environment, obviously, is to hold on to talent. But it's also, if many people are leaving jobs, it's also an opportunity to be hiring folks. And you want to be able to attract the best talent. You want to have a culture and a reputation for a culture that people want to be a part of, right? Going backwards here, a quick start training for new hires. If you've done your homework and done peer-to-peer learning, implemented this across your organization, as you're doing that, you're building the reservoir of knowledge you need to train new employees and get them trained up quickly with real practical advice, right? Finally, knowledge preservation, right? If people do leave your company, which may happen for all sorts of reasons, they don't have to take their knowledge with them necessarily and leave your company without those skills and important institutional knowledge. You can preserve that by having them create the training along the way. Next slide, please. Being at the cutting edge of L&D. Now, this is something that's actually, I think, very important, especially for learning and development teams that want to shine in their company and really be an exemplar of what it means to push the boundaries of technology, to integrate the different platforms you're using, and to really get the best kind of content and the most effective kind of training to your organization. So first of all, I want to say right now, especially, authentic is the new professional. It may be better, in fact, to have a piece of content, perhaps a video that's a little bit less polished than your traditional learning content, but is directly from someone who has experience doing the job and can speak, with authenticity about that role. That is actually more impressive to people today than something that's got a whole lot of production value to it. Why is that? It's because we're engaging with stuff all the time that's homemade. And in fact, one of the other reasons why peer-to-peer learning is at the cutting edge of L&D, not only technology, but in the culture of it, is because we can learn at work the way that we learn in our lives. If I want to figure out how to do something, I'm going to Google it. I'm going to look on YouTube. I'm going to find a how-to video. I'm going to see someone who's done it and can show me exactly how to do it. Why shouldn't I have the same ability to learn from my peers in my organization like that? Finally, leveraging new technology. Platforms like Powtoon, where even if you don't have a background creating videos, even if you don't have a creative bone in your body, or if you do, but you haven't found an outlet for that passion at work, allows people to create videos that make an impact, that people pay attention to. And we're going to hear from Joe in a little bit how, in fact, you make those videos as good as you can. But the videos themselves don't stand alone. It's all our communication channels. It's our, our engagement platforms that we're using internally. Perhaps we've got an LXP or an LMS, right? All of these platforms need to connect with each other too. And you need to be able to put content on there that people are going to resonate with and be able to access in a way that makes sense in the flow of their work. Next slide, please. Before I hand it over to Joe, I just wanted to talk about 3 of the most valuable, most essential types of videos that you can create for peer-to-peer learning, and to share this methodology with your organization so people in your organization can make these videos. First, animated explainers. They are classic. They're very flexible visibly. You can have them be look more like line icons and infographics, or more on the cartoony side. But they're very flexible, and they allow you to explain just about anything complex in an easy and engaging way. Screen recordings. It's obvious, I think, rather than write a paragraph of text that no one is going to read about how to do something on a software platform, I can record my screen and show you exactly. Could even then put that in the studio and add text or other shapes or things to highlight the important parts. And then someone doesn't need to be told what to do. They can see it for themselves. And finally, video messages. This is a way to sort of take that classic face-to-camera, almost YouTube style video, but share it with people in the organization. Have people simply speak, share a presentation and speak to their webcam about the work that they do, or whatever the skill is that they're sharing. It's very personal, it's very authentic, and it's easy for anyone in your organization to make. I do want to just hand things along to Joe, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what he sees in the industry from where he sits, and also some tips on creating excellent videos for learning. Joe.
All right. Thanks so much, Nick. That was great stuff. Welcome, everybody. My name is Joe Drews. I am the founder of Drews Multimedia. I am going to spend a few minutes talking about how to use videos effectively. I did want to, just like Nick, I wanted to start with a poll. So let's go to the poll question. And I wanted to know how much and how often are you currently using video for L&D? And when I mentioned video, I did want to be clear here. I've talked to some people, and people get confused between e-learning and video. So I want to make sure we're talking about video where it's more of a passive experience rather than an interactive where you click next in an e-learning. So videos where you just click play, like a YouTube video or something like that, where you just watch it. So do you use it all the time? Is that something you use constantly when you can, but it's something you guys don't develop and it's very expensive, or whatever you're using, you don't have anybody that specializes in it, or you don't use it at all? Some companies I know don't use video whatsoever. They just use it when they either don't use it or don't know how to use it. So go ahead and answer that poll, and then I'll just keep talking, and I'll come back and see where everybody's coming. So far, we're looking at when we can. Before I get into some of the tips, I kind of wanted to zoom out a little bit and talk about what I've seen in my experience. I've been in learning and development for almost 16 years in a variety of roles, and things that I kind of notice that I like to try to change and try to see is, the first is, a lot of corporations are stuck in this create launch track, as I call it. Is we're kind of in that old saying of this always works, and so we've always done it this way kind of thinking. And which is great. It works great to create a course, launch it, and track it. But sometimes I like to think something different. We need to evolve past that norm sometime, kind of thinking outside the box. There's a Disney process that I absolutely love. They call it the blue sky process, where they basically meet and throw anything against the wall and see if it sticks. And that goes with any attraction they're creating or anything like that. And that's kind of what I think when you start creating training, it should start with just that blue sky meeting of let's see throw things against the wall, see how crazy we can get, and see what we can come up with for our learning. So that's where I start. I'm thinking about like moving past that norm. And then lastly, kind of peers within our own businesses. Sometimes we forget there are perfect resources to tap. Nick was talking about like video creation. And video creation can be something that doesn't have to be created all the time by L&D. It can be created by someone in your industry, in your company, that really has a passion for video and working with your peers. And it could be maybe not creation video, it could be voiceover, it could be something that they could help out with your L&D. And that's a great resource to tap not just for cost savings, but also for, it's just that culture of building that learning culture within your company. And so people can get involved that way. And so those are the three things that I see constantly that I try to kind of change companies' minds a little bit when I work with them, of changing kind of that norm. All right, we can go to the next one. The first thing that I absolutely recommend, especially when you're trying to do something against that norm, is getting buy-in. And getting buy-in is something that I used to struggle with. I remember struggling with kind of finding that what the best process would be for that. The first thing is you shoot high. Meet with the CEO if you can. Get to the top, because if the CEO gets that buy-in, the whole company will follow suit. And so that's where you want to meet. Don't be afraid to meet with some of those CEOs if you can. Meet with the founders. Meet with people you can talk to that can make a change and can support you. You can prove yourself if you need to with statistics, reviews, cost savings, anything that will help your cause to bring or change that learning culture. If videos are new for you, building and showing what a video can do. If you're maybe spending a little more money, or like I think one of the top poll looks like, you could, when we can, but it's very expensive or time consuming, prove yourself. Why do you need to use that time? Prove it to them. Perform a trial run. One of the things I did in my history was I performed trial runs. If someone's really kind of giving me some pushback, I just launch the video to a small group of people and get feedback from them, and then report back saying, look at this feedback. They all love how the video is only 3 minutes long rather than a 30-minute e-learning, and the retention is the same because we did an assessment. So that's the kind of things I'm talking about when I say trial run. Really try to push that culture as much as you can to really help the learner. And that's kind of what it's all about, right? As we build these things, it's all about the learner and the final kind of participant that's going to see that. All right, so let's go to the next slide and talk about specifically what makes a good video good and a bad video bad. And I'm going to go through these a little bit. Like we talked about, you'll get a recording of this so you can kind of take a look at this in more detail. So some things I wanted to kind of talk about. First is length. Length less than 5 minutes. Is that good or bad? I am in the strong belief that less than 5 minutes is a really important goal for videos. I say that because not just of simple YouTube, but I mean, we all know TikTok is about 3-minute lengths at the most. Things like that. That's where our attention span is currently, whether we like it or not. That's the current attention span. And so that's the kind of goal that when I create a video is always less than 5 minutes. And I always get good feedback if it's less than 5 minutes. If it's longer than 5 minutes, sometimes you can't help it. It has to be longer than 5 minutes. But just things to remember as you build it is kind of try for that goal of 5 minutes. If it has to be very long, if you're going into 15 minutes, think about splitting it up, making 3 different videos 5 minutes long. And then text on screen versus voiceover. Voiceover is always a good option, a better option, because then you have a voice talking them and guiding them through the video. Text on screen can be a lot of just reading, and and people have to pause it sometimes if you put on too much text when it comes to a video. That's a lot of people's first go-to, is to put a bunch of text on screen. You want to provide that voiceover. Now, I know a lot of people are afraid. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear themselves. They don't like to talk. They don't want to hear the voiceover, or they don't have the equipment to provide good voiceover. But the equipment is actually not that expensive. If you kind of look into it, it's really not that a huge cost. And then when it comes to good voiceover, lots of things to remember, just making sure you have good sound. You don't have to be perfect. I think that's kind of another thing. You don't have to be perfect. It just has to be there and guiding them through the video. And then multiple topics. Always good idea to stick to one topic in a video, just one. Don't try to do too much. If you throw everything in the kitchen sink, people will be overwhelmed. So if you need multiple topics, try to make videos on each topic separately. All right, let's go to the next few things. Launch on LMS. I put bad. I don't mean to say that it's always bad. You can always launch on LMS. That's always fine. What I'm saying is that it doesn't always have to be on the LMS. Sometimes it could be, if it's a quick how-to, you can put that on the intranet. Again, kind of going back to that old process of, develop, track, and launch and track. We can put it on the intranet, just for people to click on if they need to. Sometimes you don't need to put it on the LMS if it provides too many clicks, if they're just looking for a quick way to how to do something on their computer. Rapid development, definitely encouraged. That's where Powtoon comes in. Powtoon's very, I use Powtoon just because I can create something very quickly. And then internal talent, we talked about that. So always try to find internal talent to help you with creating and voice and then the designing. It's always helpful for the culture. People get much more involved, and then your training becomes something people want to take. All right. quickly, I have a couple of examples that I wanted to show. I have these full videos that I can share the links, and I'll share the links at the end of this video. I made these extremely quickly, but I just showed what it looks like, good and bad. You'll see on the left, lots of text, no voiceover on that one, as you'll see if you want to watch them later. The right, much more visual, lot less text, and it has voiceover. So when you watch the videos, you'll see kind of the differences and how learning. I did exaggerate some. You'll see I think I put like scary Halloween music on the bad one. So it's exaggerated the music a little bit, but you can take a look. I'll send those links so you can kind of see what I created in very quick time. So that's kind of where we are with video. I'm going to pass it on to Jonah to kind of finish us off talking about the collaboration aspect of it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Nick, for your presentation previously. So yeah, what I'd like to do is share with all of you a little bit more information about this notion of collaborative learning, which is something that we believe very strongly at 360 Learning, and why putting in place a distributed and collaborative and peer-to-peer learning approach really will strengthen your company culture. And I saw even earlier on when we launched the first poll, someone asked, what do you mean by peer-to-peer learning? And I hope that maybe through this, the next couple of slides, I'll be able to walk through that and provide you some examples of how we do that at 360 Learning. Maybe just a word about 360 Learning before we move on, if you're not familiar with us. So we are an education technology provider, and our platform kind of enables companies to put in place collaborative learning and build a collaborative learning culture. And by that, I really mean that anyone in the organization can be identifying their own personal learning needs or can be contributing to the creation of content. We saw, some examples of that also, just specifically to video, can be part of the learning experience. So it's a real sort of human experience with people asking questions from experts or from peers. So our technology sort of enables all of that within the organizations. And if you could please move to the next slide, Robin. Thank you. So we saw a little bit of this. Nick alluded to several of these points, but I just wanted to reiterate that we are operating in a difficult context today. I mean, all of us are facing a lot of different challenges, and just a few to mention here, and there could be a lot more, are the fact that we're working with distributed teams. At 360 Learning, we're quite fortunate in that we've been a remote company for quite some time, so we're used to that. Our culture enables that. Our processes enable that. But this has been accelerated, as we all know, over the past 18 months, 2 years, and companies are struggling with maintaining and building this culture when people are all over the map and working remotely. And there's a real strength in that, but you have to know how to harness that and unlock it. When it doesn't work, that can often lead to disengagement. People feel like they're operating as little islands, that there's not a lot of collaboration, there's not a lot of learning happening, there's not a lot of free exchange of ideas, there's not a lot of creativity. People get stifled, and that's often what leads to disengagement, and that's a serious challenge facing companies. And if you kind of push that to its next to the limit, you will find that that's one of the contributing factors in what's being called the Great Resignation, and people leaving companies because they do feel disengaged. They don't feel like there's opportunities. They feel isolated. They feel like they're not getting from their professional life the kind of fulfillment that they need. And so that they're looking elsewhere. And so that's an interesting phenomenon. So those are just a few challenges, and to set up some context. And if you can go to the next slide, please. There's no silver bullet to addressing that. There's, and every company is different, and even if there are trends that we're able to measure and observe. But ultimately, your company's culture is a strong force to help retain people, to engage them, to help them grow, to create opportunities for learning and collaboration. And so your culture, your company's culture, which are not just words on your website that explain the 2 or 3 things that you believe in, but are really almost the operational DNA, what sits behind how your teams function from a technical point of view, what brings them together, what creates, enables teams to work together. That's really what your culture is. And underlying that, or a big part of that, what we've seen through our research, and there's some stats here on this slide, is that your learning culture contributes in a huge way to that. Top talent today are looking for learning opportunities in their jobs. They want to grow, they want to learn, they want to challenge themselves, they want to share their knowledge, and they want to benefit from the knowledge of others. So we need to be creating the opportunities, the channels, the moments for that learning to happen. And I'm not going to read the stats on this slide, but on the left-hand side, it basically says that people want that. And on the right-hand side, it says they want to do that. They want to learn from one another. So that introduces this notion of collaborative learning, of peer-to-peer learning, which is not a top-down, this is what you're going to learn today, this is what you're going to learn this quarter, this is what you're going to learn this year. It is a much more organic process whereby a network, whereby people in your organization are learning from one another. And if we look on the next slide, you can see a little bit what we mean by collaborative learning or peer-to-peer learning or decentralized learning. And really the best way to describe that is kind of, in opposition to this more traditional learning model. I've been working in L&D for a long time. I've worked in several organizations, including very large organizations that have a more traditional approach to learning. And there was a time, and maybe there still is for some companies, where that works. But that traditional approach is very top-down. That it's not necessarily tailored to individuals, that it takes a long time to develop content. It takes an even longer time to update content. And when you're looking at when you're measuring, you're measuring clicks and how many completions there are, to Joe's point earlier about LMSs, but that's not what you want to measure. You want to measure impact. You want to measure, are you giving people access to the information and knowledge and resources they need to make them better performers? Are you able to iterate your learning quickly? Are you able to respond to the fast-paced changes of your business? Is your learning relevant? Does it specifically address the needs that individuals are saying they have? Yes, you'll be able to see these images later on. I'm sorry if that's difficult to read. You'll have access to the slides after the presentation. And finally, is it not top down? Is it very much, a democratic process whereby individuals are able to say, I need to learn this, and someone else is able to say, oh, I can help you with that, and you're able to put them in touch and make that collaborative learning happen. So that's what collaborative learning looks like. So with that in mind, I want you to think about where you guys are today in your organizations. Let's move to the next slide and introduce the next poll, which is really just a question around who's creating the learning content in your organization. Creation of content is just one aspect of collaborative learning, but I'd be interested to know, are you creating this centrally, your L&D teams? Are you slightly decentralizing it by working with managers and SMEs? Or do you really have a very open approach to this where anyone can create content using a variety of media, videos, many other things to really build that learning culture? So let's take a look at that poll and see what people are saying. Great, a lot of you are obviously working with subject matter experts. That's just sort of a key thing. I'm glad to see that less of it is just purely centralized and just the L&D team. But still, you're all kind of on this spectrum between a top-down approach and a truly decentralized approach. But that's interesting to see. On the next slide, just to share a little bit more information from some of the research that we do, it's great to see that for many of you, you are working with subject matter experts and maybe even opening it broader to really any employee or any individual in your company to share their knowledge. But what we've seen is that there still is very much this top-down approach out in the marketplace. The HR and L&D professionals that we poll say that only a very small percentage, a small percentage of people who actually create content within their organization. So that's what we're trying to address. And some of the benefits of this approach, of this collaborative learning approach, which we'll see on the next slides. First, by enabling people to create content, it makes the content more useful. It makes it more purposeful. It hits the nail on the head, as I like to say, meaning individuals identify needs and other individuals in the organization are able to address them. On the next slide, another benefit is just the fact that content that's created through collaborative means is easier to update. We've probably all had the experience of going into sort of clunky learning management systems and finding learning that is outdated, that has, images of people who left the company 2.5 years ago, or anything like that. So there's just a whole stack of technology at our disposal today to make learning content easy to update, and easy to maintain. And finally, on the next slide, just one of the other advantages to this whole approach is that collaborative learning boosts engagement. And one of the ways it does that is really by creating human-to-human interactions in an otherwise asynchronous learning environment. So through the use of questions or comments or polls or forums, or as we've seen, allowing people to like things and things like that, it just creates a lot of interaction and collaboration that really boosts engagement and makes the learning even more effective. So the last thing I wanted to talk about on the next slide, to kind of bring it back, now that I've sort of established what is collaborative learning and the benefits of that and what it looks like, is just share a little bit more about what this looks like within 360 Learning, because my job is to look after the learning and development internally at our company. And so one of the key things that we help train people around through this collaborative approach is our culture. And as I said earlier, culture is not just a few pages on your company's website, but it's a real thing. It's a living and breathing experiment in an organization. At 360 Learning, our culture even has a name. It's called Convexity. And it's really a clear set of behaviors and processes and things like that help drive how we operate and how we succeed, how we function, how we interact. We screen for it in our in our recruitment process, and we train for it while people are with the company. We're building and we continue to build learning experiences for people to understand all the different pillars of our culture. Just to give you an example of what some of those might be, we talk a lot about continuous feedback, giving and receiving feedback. That's something that you might find in a lot of organizations, but we have a very particular take on it. We talk about benevolence, sort of bringing a benevolent way of working to all of our interactions. We have a principle which is called a low authority, which basically means that we have a pretty flat structure. And a coach, a manager, or a coach's job is not to tell his or her team what to do, but to coach them and guide them to make the right decisions that are right for them and right for the company. So there's a lot of these principles, and behind those there are behaviors, there's ways of working that can be learned. And so we've set out rather ambitiously to build through collaborative learning training programs to help people understand all these different elements of convexity. On the next slide is just a couple of screenshots and examples of what that might look like. And of course, I'd be happy to share any more information with any of you who might be interested. But on the left-hand side, you sort of see a typical learning path that someone might go through when they first join the company. So convexity and these principles are really part of day one. What does it mean to give feedback? What does it mean to receive feedback? How to do that effectively? We ask people to give feedback on the onboarding process itself. So they're actually practicing giving feedback by critiquing their onboarding as they're going through it. And on the right-hand side are just some additional screenshots with examples of what that experience looks like and how it's done collaboratively. On the top, I mentioned benevolence. We have a buddy system where we pair people up to really kind of build their internal network and what a colleague of mine calls relational scaffolding within the company to really build, to be effective within the company. And so one of the key ways that we promote benevolence is through this buddy system. And then on the bottom, another example of, and it's a little bit harder to read here, but basically here's a case of somebody providing feedback on the content itself, and we're actually able to improve it on the fly to make sure that the learning experience is really valuable for everyone. So that is a little bit more about collaborative learning and how enabling that in your companies builds a strong learning culture, a culture where people are sharing their expertise, are learning from one another, and in turn, you're building a stronger company culture and building engagement, retention, and fighting off some of those challenges that we saw early on. Great. So the next thing I just wanted to do before we move to the question and answer, on the next slide, please, is invite all of you, if you are working in learning and development, if you're an L&D practitioner, please click here to join our community of CLO, which is called CLO Connect. It's really just, it's a group of L&D people from all over the world, different companies, different cultures, where we talk about the nuts and bolts of L&D. People ask real questions, about onboarding, about knowledge management, about management training, about anything, and they get practical answers from other L&D professionals. So it's a great resource if you're working in L&D to get ideas, to share ideas, to build your network. And I encourage all of you to please sign up if you're working in L&D. That link will bring you to a form that you fill out, and then I'll follow up with you directly. Okay. On the next slide, I think we're pretty much ready to go into our Q&A section. So just to remind you, there is a questions tab on the right-hand side. So please do put your questions in that questions tab. That'll make it easier for us to address them in turn. And also, there's a poll that I believe is going to be opening up in a moment in the polls tab. If you could please go in and respond to that poll, that will also be an opportunity for you to get some more information about any of our organizations that we're representing here today. Okay, great. So that poll is up there. So please take a second to go in if you'd like more information and put your questions in the question tab. And now we will address some of those. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. That was a really interesting presentation. I learned a lot, and I see we've already got quite a few questions, so we're going to start with some of these. I think this can go really to any of you, but maybe particularly for Jonah. We've got a question. What if there are loads of courses created, but people won't be looking at them as there's too much random stuff, some great quality, others bad, some outdated?
Yeah, well, okay, so I can sort of address how, I can answer sort of how that works within our own learning platform, because there's functionality in the platform to sort of take that into account. So, I mean, there's still a role for learning and development to manage centrally the overall learning experience, your catalog. If things if courses have not been viewed in years, you can remove them from the catalog. That's perfectly fine. In the courses themselves, there's a relevance score which people can give, which really is answering the question, how relevant is this to my job? Is this helping me improve? Is this helping me be more impactful? Is this driving performance? And you can rate and gauge the quality of your courses based on that. And then it's really up to the individual authors to take that feedback on board and make improvements and engage with the learners and ask them, what can we be doing better? What else should we be doing? And it's really an iterative process, but there is functionality within the platform to help you identify what's outdated, what works less well, and to be able to react quickly to that.
And I'd love to jump in on that. And there's an element to that question that's really also about quality control. Not just, I think about, obviously, yes, it's about the quality of the training. Is this really going to have the impact we want it to have? Is it up to date? All of that. But it's also about are the elements we need there in terms of the branding and the look, the design standards that we want to maintain. Is there a way we can pass that along as well? I know that certainly in Powtoon, there's ways you can create your branding guidelines. You can select specific templates that you want folks in your organization to stick to or start from. And that's an important piece. And the other thing I would say is, we see this actually. This is another one of those pieces of L&D now sort of mirroring what's happening with video culture elsewhere. The feedback to that training, to either if it's video or whatever the other content is, that feedback directly from the people who've engaged with the content will help you understand, is this meeting the mark? And I think that engaging with that on a regular basis, updating the content, and remember, it also is another opportunity to engage another employee, another colleague in training their peers and in committing to sharing their expertise across the organization. So it's really an opportunity to say, maybe that one wasn't working. Let's ask someone else on the team. Let's ask this person to provide an update and give them the feedback. Perhaps they've even just engaged with that feedback organically through sharing the content.
And just real quick, also, I wanted to talk about the out-of-date courses. To me, that tells me that there was a missing element in the needs analysis at the very beginning, because part of the development process should be, how are we going to check the course for relevancy after it's launched? How are we going to continue to check if it's up to date or things like that? That should be part of the process of the development. And so if there are courses that are live that are either not relevant or completely out of date, that to me tells me there was something in the needs analysis that needs to go back, or your process in general, because I've had this problem too, and I realized it needed to be kind of talked about in the needs analysis. So we had a process of, okay, when are we checking this course again? A year from now? What are we going to do a year from now? Are we going to take it down? Are we going to have a new version? That conversation needs to happen at the beginning. And that really helped the process of not having those out-of-date courses live.
Awesome, that makes sense. Okay, we've got another question here, I think a little bit about buy-in. How do I convince my CEO that Zoom hour-long videos talking about our software is not training, and to really retain the knowledge, learners need mixed methodology? Anyone, feel free to hop in there.
Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, I've run into this very similar issue of those kind of, that's where training kind of is. A lot of people think that just kind of jumping on a Zoom for an hour is training. There's a couple things that I've done and you can try. One is being very honest with the CEO. I've done that too, of just being very open of what training really is and giving them examples of what it can be. And some CEOs like to be in front of the camera, which is great. I think that's great. If they want to be part of your training, fantastic. One thing you could also do is edit it rather than doing it live, have them record it and then edit it into a way that's a little more not interactive, but just putting questions on the screen, just kind of putting a little more animation to it. So it's a little less just talking at a screen over, like kind of sometimes monotone. You can actually add some other elements to it to kind of, bring it out a little bit. So it's a little more entertaining, and also break it up. You can break it up into 4 or 15 minutes, things like that. So, and if they're still kind of pushing back against that, that goes back to what I talked about earlier, is testing it. Just do it and then test it and then tell them, say, look, this is what we did. These are the results. This is the feedback we got. We got better feedback. We got better retention, and then showing them results. And then CEOs always look at cost savings, a lot of them. So I always try to come to them with, what are the cost savings from doing it this way? How does it help? So especially with video, and I've worked with manufacturing, I've used the comment of, if you take people off the manufacturing time for less time, you're saving the company money. So having 5-minute videos versus 30-minute e-learning, you're saving the company lots of money. I even calculated it for one company, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars changing it from a 30-minute e-learning to a 5-minute video. So things like that, the CEOs will listen to.
That makes sense.
I just one thing to add to that. I think that raises a really interesting point, which is also about the role of L&D in an organization that has a just distributed and collaborative learning model. I mean, your CEO should feel empowered to create content, as should your head of marketing, as should your head of sales, as should individuals from those teams. But as L&D professionals, we have expertise as well, and that is in creating impactful learning experiences. So you're also there to coach those individuals and let them know, look, we want to capture your knowledge, but this is the best way to do it. These are the formats we're using. These are the opportunities we have. And I think that they'll really appreciate that you bring that expertise and help them make their messages even more effective.
Great. All right, well, I've got another question here. It's pretty popular. I hope I understand the context. I think it's about how to build a culture of learning at your organization. The question is, how do we influence the people who don't want to Google or search for their solutions? My organization is experiencing a lack of curiosity.
Well, I mean, I think from my perspective, nothing is more engaging than video, and a video someone and work with has created is oftentimes that's enough to get that window of curiosity and attention. and it's, you know, it's not another email. It's not another, oh, I guess I got to go search on the you know, wherever this video is being hosted, but to include that collaborative and social piece of it. If someone finishes it and they're crowing about it on their team Slack channel, on their company Slack channel, it's another way to invite people in and to capture their attention early. So that's from my perspective, I think that's one thing that definitely can help. But I know that's part of that disengagement piece that Jonah brought up, that distributed teams really, that's a challenge to overcome for sure.
Yeah, and I'll quickly say, just kind of, if you have that, if people are coming to the L&D team and asking questions, I almost would look at that as a good thing, because they're finding you to ask the questions. And I know, I think the question's talking about they want them to find the answers themselves. But I'll just start by looking at the positive of they're coming to L&D to find questions. So it sounds like there's a good culture there because they're coming to L&D to ask the questions, if I'm understanding the question right. But the other side of it is, instead of coming to you all the time, you can be overwhelmed with questions that you want people to find the answers. And that's where the culture comes in. And that's where building that culture of learning and finding the answers. And just kind of what Nick talked about is kind of creating simple videos, creating kind of that culture of this is how you do things. And then that repetitive of, hey, this is what you can do to find things, and just kind of do that in different mediums. They'll get it. It's not an overnight thing, especially when it comes to culture. It's not going to change right off the bat. There's not one perfect video you can make that suddenly people are going to start Googling everything and finding themselves. It's a culture shift, and that's going to take some time. But if you focus on that and focus on your L&D, and the branding is really important for the L&D specifically, it can really kind of move that along and move that needle for people to start researching themselves.
Great. All right, I think we probably only have time for one more quick question, so we'll end with this one. For an organization that's new to L&D or LMS usage, I guess, how do you suggest we start measuring the impact of peer-to-peer learning initiatives?
Sorry, can you say that again? I couldn't quite hear that.
Oh yeah, sure. For an organization that's new to L&D or LMS usage, how do you suggest we start measuring the impact of peer-to-peer learning initiatives?
Okay. Well, I think I can address that. I mean, I think measuring impact for any learning initiative, well, first of all, that's always a challenge, and it always requires you know, a thoughtful approach. The way that we do it at 360Learning is, you know, we look at the desired business outcomes. We're not, training is not just something that you should be giving to people because it's nice to have and it's sort of a nice day out. That was very much true when it was face-to-face training, and it's even more true when it's collaborative and peer-to-peer training. So I think that you need to define the business problem that you're trying to solve for. Create a collaborative or peer-to-peer learning experience that addresses that business problem, and then have a means to measure the impact you're having on that. I mean, I can give you some examples from our own, from my own experience. This is one that pops in my mind, even though we've done it a while back. We have customer success, customer-facing teams who give presentations to customers. And so what we wanted to do was really improve the net promoter score that those customers give following those presentations. So we had a real metric that we could measure. We through discussions with the team, we understood that maybe there were some challenges they were having in their level of confidence to present. And so we created a learning experience, a peer-to-peer learning experience, whereby they could work on those skills. And in the end, we were able to then look at the data and measure the NPS following those webinars that they did, and to see if we're able to move the needle. So I don't know. I think that, you know, peer-to-peer is sort of the way that you do it, but your overall impact assessment strategy should be tied to your business outcomes and objectives.
And if there's a couple more minutes, I'd just take a step back as well as what Jonah said. I'd take a step back whenever we start I've started a few training departments at different corporations, and I always like to start at just the branding of the L&D department itself before you even start the launching of courses. So you can communicate, we have these trainings coming out, or we have a new LMS coming out, like that communication with your corporation, instead of just launching trainings just without any announcements, kind of talking about that, communicating that, building that kind of excitement over, oh, we're starting this new video, or we're starting this new training, kind of that, building that excitement. So when it finally launches, not only are they prepared for it, they have seen the months-long kind of communications of once a month of, hey, get ready for this. There's some fun stuff that's happening. Here's the L&D department. If you can create a logo, I've done that before for just your L&D department, launching your new L&D department, just kind of building that excitement is really helpful to kind of get that more engagement, because people are now excited over the last 4, 5, 6 months, however long you did the campaign for that new training and that new LMS. So I would suggest even backing up and doing that for a few months before even launching your first course, if you can, if it's not too late.
I'd love to add to that too, that there's an element to culture that isn't always borne out in the numbers, say in revenue numbers or other KPIs that you might be trying to budge with training. So don't neglect surveying, reaching out to people who are engaging with the peer-to-peer learning and getting their opinion about it, doing that, asking some of those kind of foundational questions at different points during the year, so that you can compare over time how that's grown and the impact that the peer-to-peer learning has had on the health of the company culture and people's attitudes about the company as well. Because I don't think you should ignore that as an outcome of peer-to-peer learning as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I do think we're genuinely out of time now. So we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for all the great questions from the audience, to our panelists. For those of you watching, if you want to learn even more, there's some useful links on the screen there where you can learn even more about what you've heard today. Again, thank you so much, everyone. And we hope to see you again for another webinar soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
folks.